So here's what we're going to sort of close with before we actually do a panel at the end of the day that kind of synthesizes what we have learned and what we're taking away. Remember what Sherry charged you with. Think about your takeaways and what you're going to immediately bring home and implement. Hopefully you have at least one from each session that you've heard today. So we're going to move into really, what are the job training and innovative education programs that we need to be paying attention to? We have some great examples on our panel. We also want to hear from you. And so in this session, I'm going to switch it up a little bit, and I'm going to ask you questions, and I even have some of you in mind, so be ready. You may not know that I have you in mind, but I do. So everybody be on the edge of their seats. We also want to hear questions from you to the panelists. They might ask you questions too, because I know they know who is out in the audience. But let's go ahead and bring everybody up. We are going to start with Kate Kinder with the National Skills Coalition. We are really pleased that Kate could join us. Thank you, Kate. And then we're going to also invite Mark Mitsui up from the Portland Community College. Many of you know Mark. We also have Michele Spires from the American Council on Education. Yes, feel free to clap as we're bringing folks up. And then we have Larry Williams from the Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industries. And then we also have joining Mark Elliott online, our virtual connection from the Economic Mobility Corporation. So we have quite a list of panelists up here. And as usual, what we're going to do is just let them introduce themselves, because they can do that better than anybody can. And here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to just run down the line, and then we'll end with you, Mark Elliott. So just tell us a little bit about your role in organization, and then we're going to start getting into what is it that we need to be looking toward related to job training and education programs of the future. I'll turn to you, Kate.
Thank you. I'm Kate Kinder, and I'm the State Strategies Director for Western States at National Skills Coalition. Worked with a number of you in my work at Oregon, at Portland Community College, so glad to be here again. National Skills Coalition is a DC-based nonprofit, and we've partnered with Oregon a lot, but we're really focused on fighting for inclusive skills training policy, recognizing that that will be essential for advancing racial equity, economic mobility, and rural opportunity. And while it's certainly not the only solution to those things, it's going to be a critical element in making and advancing opportunities for workers, for learners, for communities, and meeting the needs of employers. We do this through 3 planks. We focus on building broad-based coalitions, recognizing that those who are doing the work and impacted by the issue are going to come up with the best solutions. So community colleges, human service agencies, community-based organizations, local workforce development boards, state agencies. We advance policies, recognizing that individual fixes are important, but really to change opportunity and trajectories for communities, we need policy solutions at the systems level. And so we work on advancing those at the state and federal level. And then we also do a lot of work around shifting the narrative. So how do we center the voices of workers, of learners, and really changing awareness of why the workforce development ecosystem and advancing access to education and quality jobs is so important.
Great. Thanks, Kate. Mark?
Hi, I'm Mark Mitsui, president of Portland Community College. I use he, him pronouns. How many folks here have ever taken a class or attended Portland Community College? Would you mind raising your hand? Great. How many of you have a friend or family member that's attended PCC? How about any community college in Oregon? All right. So Portland Community College serves over 50,000 students each year. When Melanie, my wife, and I first moved to Portland, we noticed that there's a lot of bridges here, and we've come to think of PCC as one of them. One end of the bridge, you've got hardworking folks who need an educational opportunity. On the other end of the bridge, we have great jobs, great employers that pay living wages. And PCC, the community colleges, higher education in general, is the bridge between the two. And providing education and training opportunity and making those opportunities more equitable by focusing on equitable student success is what we're all about and what we're focused on. Each year before the pandemic, we'd send about 5,000 students to universities in our transfer path and also graduate several thousand CTE graduates. We include programs like cybersecurity. We're recognized by the National Security Agency and DHS as a Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. We are a Maritime Center of Excellence, recognized by Department of Transportation. Yeah, give it up for Maritime. We also have a grant from National Science Foundation for drones. What are they called? Unoccupied aerial systems, our civilian drones lingo. And then you heard about our dental science program in partnership with Portland State University, the Oregon Manufacturing and Innovation Center. We just opened a training center in Scappoose for advanced manufacturing and several other programs. Career pathways is an area that we are focused on. You'll hear a little bit more about that. We have 53 career pathways at PCC. Our last two cohorts had completion rates of 88%. For students of color, the completion rate was 90%. And so bridging the equity gap, bridging the opportunity gap includes and requires wraparound support services and coaching, in addition to connecting students with benefits and this public benefits integration. So the last thing, Kate worked on this, Pathways to Opportunity, which is led by PCC. It's a statewide consortium of all 17 community colleges working to integrate public benefits around students so they can focus on school, study more, work less, and graduate. The majority of our students attend part-time. They can't graduate on time because they're working two jobs. And so anytime we can alleviate the need to work that second job while they're going to school, they're going to be able to take more credits, more likely to graduate. So that's what we're excited about with Future Ready Oregon, the Community College Career Pathway and the Credit for Prior Learning. Our next panelist is an expert in that. So thank you for being here.
Great. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for the introduction. So I'm Michele Spires. I'm with the American Council on Education, and I have to ask you a courageous question. Who has never heard of the American Council on Education, or ACE? Raise your hand. It's okay. It's a safe space. All right. So ACE was formed in 1918 as the Emergency Council on Higher Education to help our World War I veterans return to the workforce. If this were easy, I think we wouldn't need these conversations today, right? Here we are, still looking at how we continue to upskill and reskill. My role at ACE is the Assistant Vice President for Learning Evaluations, which means I have the privilege of leading the team that does the tactical, very hands-on evaluations of learning for all different kinds of clients, right? So we're connecting traditional and non-traditional learning to not only degrees and credit recommendations and semester hour learning, but also, as Kate said, to workforce competencies and skills. And this is part of ACE's mission to champion equity, access, and completion as part of our strategic imperatives. So when we think about credit for prior learning, we've been throwing that term around a lot. I'd like to level set on what that definition is. First, it's learning acquired outside a formal higher education classroom. And second, it is assessed and validated by a trusted source with a process that's equivalent to formal learning experiences. And we're going to use the term learning equivalencies because it could be semester hour credits, it could be quarter hours, it could be competencies, it could be any kind of learning nugget. Our tagline is put your learning to work. And what an individual learns is more important than when, where, and how the individual learned it, but we want to have validated and trusted sources. And I really appreciate Patsy for sharing her story because I'm going to use the term independent learner. I'm not going to use the term adult or working because there are so many different paths in lives, and the numbers, the age numbers, well, let's just shoot those out the window for right now. When you think about our work at ACE and learning evaluations, we support transcripts, we build prior learning networks. ACE as a whole is working with the Carnegie classification system to modernize that and to enrich those classifications. Mark sits on our board, so he's got a little intel there. But also, when we think about the employers, we work with the Department of Defense. Yes, each branch of the armed services. We work with employer training providers, Jiffy Lube, JetBlue. We work with training and education providers, Skillsoft, Sailor Academy, professional associations. So as we're thinking about credit for prior learning and the tremendous opportunity, I work with a lot of states nationally. This is the first time I've seen this infusement and investment from state to really rally support. So congratulations to you, and I'm proud and honored to be part of this.
Thanks, Michele. Larry?
Hello, my name is Larry Williams. I work for the Apprenticeship and Training Division, which is part of the Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industries. And I send my regards from the Labor Commissioner Val Hoyle and Apprenticeship Director Lisa Ransom, who could not be here because they are the chair and secretary, respectively, of the Apprenticeship and Training Council. And that council is meeting today as well to start to plan for how to put out those grant opportunities. And apprenticeship is called out in one section of the bill to give out up to $20 million. And our industries are a little bit different than in the rest of the bill. We do have expanding healthcare and manufacturing, but we also are called out specifically to promote pre-apprenticeship and supportive services in the construction industry. So it's a little bit different in that regard. And I connect to that really well because I work to manage a workforce development program on behalf of the Oregon Department of Transportation. And we fund pre-apprenticeship programs and supportive services for apprentices to increase diversity and retention and completion rates for apprentices in the highway construction trades, things like carpentry, cement masons, iron workers, laborers, operating engineers, and painters. Apprenticeship, for those who don't know, is a method of training that is involved in at least a year of on-the-job training plus related instruction. And so sometimes they're referred to as middle-skill jobs. We like to talk about earn while you learn, and we're the other four-year degree. Those are sort of our slogans. But even when you're working towards a middle-wage, middle-income position in construction or in healthcare or in manufacturing, you're often starting off at a very modest rate, particularly if you have children, if you have a single parent-led household. And the average age of apprentices, like I think I heard mentioned at the community college, is about 29 as well. So many of these are people who do have families to support as they're getting their education and training.
Great, thank you so much. And now we're going to turn to Mark Elliott. If you can introduce yourself and your organization, and then we'll dig deeper on questions.
Hi, everybody. I'm coming to you live from the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Sorry I couldn't be with you in Portland, but very much appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts with you. I'm president of a nonprofit based in New York called the Economic Mobility Corporation. We aim to identify, support, and evaluate promising programs to help low-income people move up. And we've done that in a variety of ways. I won't go through all of them, but we're probably best known for conducting rigorous evaluations of workforce programs that are among the very few to ever have shown large sustained earnings impacts. By rigorous, I mean randomized control trial evaluations, considered the gold standard in evaluation. Many of you are probably aware of this kind of approach. The last 6 times we recommended organizations undertake a randomized control trial evaluation, each time they showed impact. They include Project Quest, Year Up, Perscolas, Wisconsin Regional Training Partnership, and JVS Boston twice. So I'll leave it there and let us move on to the next part of the panel.
That's great, thank you, Mark. So here's what we want to do. We're going to mix this up a little bit today because we've probably gotten to the point of the day, right? Similar to what was said. We're hearing a lot of common themes and repeated themes and repeated topics. So here's a question that I actually want to pitch to all of you. And you can just yell this out. It's okay. I think we're at the point of the day where that's all right, right? Okay, good. So obviously, there are 2 types, right, of practices, and especially when we talk about education and learning and job training, there's so many different examples of training programs and training structures, and here's what we want to try to tease out. Some of these have been around for a really long time, and they have staying power, right? And so when we think about apprenticeships and the apprenticeship model, this earn and learn model, we just know, right, not only in our heart of hearts, but on metrics and evaluation, that this is a training model that works. It has staying power, right? And then we also know that there are innovative and new training programs that have yet to be fully tested, but we're seeing numbers and we're just understanding that there's something worth pursuing here. I think we're hearing a little bit of both, right? We're hearing all day, you know, what we need to ramp up because we know it has staying power, and it's time to scale up. Apprenticeships probably are one of those, right? And then we're also hearing we've just tested around the margins of things like credit for prior learning, right? We've had experiments over the past 10 years, and so where are we now that really can put down on paper and then in practice what this looks like. So I'd like to just hear from you really quickly. Call out one that has staying power, that you know is a training program or a training structure that should be or already is in Future Ready, or call out one that you really know is innovative and new that we should be paying attention to. Anybody can answer that question, and you can answer either one, staying power or innovative. On-the-job training, great, and that came up in the last panel, right, repeatedly, how important that is. What else? What has staying power, or what's something that we really need to be paying attention to? Internships, absolutely. More on the earn and learn, right? Paid internships, thank you, amen. Okay. And technology as apprenticeship. So how are we really exploring apprenticeship models for some of these occupations and industries that have not been focused on? Yes?
For the life science industry, BioPro workforce training. Been around for a while, industry developed.
Okay, BioPro workforce training. So some very specific training, industry approved, right, is what I'm hearing, but may not be on everybody's radar. Others? Incumbent worker training, right. So how are we really making sure that we're focusing on the retention and the advancement and paying attention to that and working that into career pathway systems building, right? What else? Yes? Data analyst training, thank you. Yes, I'm working with a partnership in Southwest Connecticut, not far from Manhattan right now, that is really, really into this data analytics piece. What else? Yes? Say it again. Cooperative education, right? This has been around for so many decades, and yet we forget that this is, again, another earn and learn, you know, sort of advanced version of internships, but something that we need to bring back. What else? Anything else that really comes to mind? Military training, yeah. How are we learning from, borrowing from, and transitioning over? Yeah, some of those learnings and trainings. Duncan? Online, absolutely. So hearkening back, I think, to it's not just having the hybrid learning available, but what have we truly learned, especially during this pandemic, about how we integrate virtual learning? Yes? Credential consolidation and alignment, right, to solve the credential chaos that still is out there. Yes. We'll take one over here and then back to you. Yep. Micro-certifications, right. So building on some of what we know really works around short, modularized, stackable, those micro-credentials, yes. We'll go here and then we'll go back here. Fast-track pathways. Great, thank you. And then we're going to take one more, and then we're going to dig deep. So be ready, panelists. Social and economic competency. Thank you. Okay. Whew. All right, no shortage, right? But point being that we have learned such a great deal, right? And we have been collectively in this work. Let's not add up how many years collectively we've all probably been in this work, right? But the opportunity here is to really understand how do we package these together. And so I'm going to turn back to all of you and ask you some specific questions. And I'm going to start, Mark Mitsui, with you, because part of the packaging, right, really makes me think about work that I see nationally working in some places and not in others. And it's what I call the career pathway systems building as opposed to career pathway program building. And so much of today has already touched on how do we really make sure that we're reaching beyond walls and institutions to build the system of career pathways that we know individuals need. So Mark, tell us a little bit about the role of community colleges, the opportunity with the legislation, and what systems building means to you in terms of career pathways.
Yes, we actually have a precedent. In 2009 or so, Oregon received a TACT grant, the Trade Adjustment Assistant Community College Career Training, which is why it's called TACT. It's the longest acronym in federal service. It was a grant that I think was about $18 million, and it established career pathways in the state of Oregon statewide. All 17 community colleges were engaged. And I think one of the things we learned from that was the systems work. Knowing, for example, that individual one-off relationships with employers in specific regions might be great for one of the community college career pathways, but not necessarily would provide the kind of information and skill identification that we were going to need on a more regional or even statewide basis. So that was one of the results of that 4-year grant. When the grant money went away, a lot of those initiatives also fell by the wayside, but the learning was retained. We kind of had that in our DNA. And so we pulled money together as a 17 community college consortia, put that in every year. We just could afford enough to keep it on life support. But now that the funding is here, it's ready to ramp up again. So all the lessons you heard earlier today, the importance of really deeply listening to employers and really not coming with preconceived notions about, here's what we have to offer, but staying open to the reality of what employers need. Reaching out also to culturally specific community-based organizations, understanding, again, deep listening to what's needed in marginalized communities across the state. Looking at and interrogating our own systems. Bill talked about embedded remediation, for example, and how can math be embedded in healthcare in a way that makes it relevant. The other, I just want to talk about a key learning point from our history with career pathways, something called integrated education and training. And this is where English language acquisition is embedded within career technical education. So somebody is learning English within the context of phlebotomy, or they're learning English within the context of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. Students pick up English faster, they pick up HVAC faster, they're more likely to graduate, they're more likely to get a job. Employers get bilingual, bicultural employees, and students get great jobs in career pathways and economic mobility. So I think those are some of the opportunities that are being presented through Future Ready Oregon, and we do have both the learning points and now the resources to begin scaling that back up again and rebuilding and adding some new additional elements like integrated education and training.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to keep going with some specific questions here, and I'd like to actually go to you, Mark, from Economic Mobility Corporation, because you listed out, I think, some incredible national examples that we have known about and learned from for many, many years, including the Wisconsin Regional Training Partnership, including Project Quest, Dazzy McKay, a favorite faculty of my organization, U.S. Vocational Services and partnerships there. So I'd love for you to dig a little bit further into what this work takes to get the right mix of our training interventions, right, and our pathway building, but really from a collaborative perspective, because I think that's so much of the work that you bring.
Sure. I don't know how much people know about the history of workforce development, but I'm going to give a little 90 seconds on it, because we're really at a very important moment in that history. 15 years ago, the general consensus in the research community and the policymaking community was that workforce development for low-income people did not work. All of the research showed there was no impact. Mark Mitsui probably knows there's an exception to that with Portland and Mount Hood, with one welfare to work evaluation. But generally, the conclusion was job training for low-income people is ineffective. And so Nobel Prize economists like James Heckman can walk around saying, don't invest in job training, invest in early childhood development, because your money is being wasted in job training. Well, happily, there are a few entrepreneurial folks who didn't listen to that consensus. Plinio Ayala, Gerald Chertavian at Year Up, Sister Pearl Caesar at Project Quest. And they really launched workforce development organizations that went against the grain being work first and don't invest in people. And so now we've seen that these organizations have demonstrated large sustained earnings impacts. Our Project Quest evaluation now shows sustained impacts 11 years after enrollment. People thought, oh, you might get an earnings impact, but it's not going to last. Perscolas, Year Up, they've shown continued results for 7 years now. So everybody should be conversant with this history and the fact that we now can counter this argument that job training is ineffective. The interesting thing about these programs, and I know them very well, is that they're all very different. Some of them do the training themselves. Project Quest does the training through community colleges and other for-profit and nonprofit providers. What they share, though, is that they really aim for jobs that pay very good wages that are higher than what their participants could get on their own. And a way to think about that, since our labor markets are so different everywhere, is at least a $5 to $10 an hour above minimum wage. They make us a substantial investment, both in dollars and time, in people. There's no quick fix on this. Project Quest, in our evaluation, they were training registered nurses. People were in training, including the remedial education some of them had to do, for 6 years. That's an almost unheard of investment certainly under WIOA. It would be impossible. Perscolas, it's 14 weeks, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. Year Up, it's 6 months of training and a 6-month paid job. So that's a second common characteristic. And the third is they're all high performers. And this is how we select organizations that we're considering for rigorous evaluation. Is they may have a great strategy, but are they implementing it well enough that a very high percentage of the people enrolled not only graduate, but get jobs in the targeted occupations?
Great. Thanks, Mark. And I'd like to use that to pivot to you, Michele, because part of what I hear you say, Mark, which I think are such important lessons learned, even though, again, they're very elegantly simple, if you will, right? There are no quick fixes. There are no silver bullets. And thank goodness we're finally understanding this, right? That this work is complex, but there also are success factors and criteria that go into this. Collaboration, partnerships being one of those. And I think all of the examples you give stand out in terms of being able to collaborate where needed. So I'm going to turn to you, Michele, because I think part of this too is investing in people pays off, right? So when we're really thinking about independent learning and upward mobility and strategies and solutions that really feed into that, tell us your experience.
And that's a great question because it connects to the staying power. So the work that we've been doing at ACE has been a journey of 65 plus years. It started in 1954 with the military, to dig deep into those learning experiences presented and shared by the employer, again for the military, each branch of service. But the process that we use is driven, how many faculty in the room? How many faculty in the room? Anybody teaching? Faculty? I want to see those hands. Shameless plug, we're always looking for faculty. Is an industry standard process to really deep dive into the content, scope, rigor, breadth, and depth of learning for that individual learning experience that is then validated by faculty who are currently teaching from across the country. Fun fact, I looked this up, we have about 1,800 faculty in our database from institutions all across the country, accredited institutions. From the state of Oregon, we have 10 of 1,800. So there's probably, when we think about Future Ready Oregon, some opportunity to activate and engage the faculty in the work of credit for prior learning, not only in a hands-on way, but in a deeper understanding of the value. I mean, the senator already stole my thunder with it not only saves time and money and helps in career planning. The resource you want to look up is through the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning. Their 72 institution study that those that receive credit for prior learning increase retention by 17%, and they take more classes at your institutions. And aren't we being measured right now on FTE and degree completion? So I think there are some real synergies and opportunities as we move forward.
That's great. Thank you. I love how direct, and wherever we can be direct around, hey, this is a real opportunity for Future Ready, right? Activate faculty in Oregon. I mean, loud and clear.
Did you hear that? Activate faculty.
So I want to turn to apprenticeships now, because again, staying power, right? We know this, and we also know that, as was pointed out, there's some real new opportunities, right, in how we define and understand what types of apprenticeships are going to serve Oregon's needs right now. So I'd love to turn back to you, Larry, to fill us in a little bit more on the models that exist here in Oregon and the expansion opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Well, some recent examples, we have apprenticeship programs established for health assistants and certified nursing assistants. And we also have been talking with the Manufacturing Innovation Opportunity Council about developing something for mechatronics in manufacturing. The issue in manufacturing is we have quite a few apprenticeship programs available, but they tend to be late career promotional opportunities into the maintenance trades, things like maintenance electricians, millwrights, and maintenance mechanics. And so we don't do a good job of providing those training opportunities early in the career for people that are coming directly into the manufacturing facility. Surgical technicians, I understand, is now available to be an apprenticeable trade. There was a roadblock in the statute that prevented it previously, so that's an area that we're exploring. And then in construction, obviously, it's already well established in the construction trades, but one of the things, coming from my background working with the ODOT Workforce Development Program, is there's been a lot of discussion about wraparound services, and I think that's a very important concept. But I'd like to talk more specifically about the kinds of supports that we offer. One is what we call job readiness supplies, and so that's things like boots, rain gear, basic tools. I think there was Patty mentioned earlier about scrubs for healthcare workers, but also good footwear is important if you're going to be on your feet all day. We also have child care subsidies that supplement the employment-related daycare that's already offered in Oregon. The employment-related daycare kind of tops out before people are really able to sustain themselves in terms of paying for child care support. And so we pick up where ERDC leaves off to keep those costs below 7% of household income for apprentices. And then hardship assistance, which has become really important through the pandemic. But so it's a combination of, we have some hardship assistance specific to personal situations, things like divorce, house fires, car repair problems, thefts of tools, those sorts of things, but then also a separate pool that we made available if there's a state of emergency, such as the pandemic, such as the wildfires. So if the governor declares a state of emergency, that's another pool that's available in terms of hardship. So some of these are calibrated to be sort of early in your career. The job readiness supplies is obviously getting you started. Some of it is throughout your career. The first half, probably, of apprenticeship, through a 2 or 4 year apprenticeship, you may need the child care subsidies if, in certain circumstances, if you're a single parent with multiple children, particularly young children. And then sometimes late career in terms of the hardship assistance, there are events that happen in people's lives that can get them off course. And even one major event that gets you where you, oh, I missed a rent payment, I missed a mortgage payment, I fall behind, I get in debt, I can't make it to class, and next thing you know, you're back to square one in terms of your job training. And so it's like if we can save some of those investments that we've already made, I think that's critical.
Please do.
So my question back to you, Future Ready Oregon, how have you considered having those apprenticeship programs validated for learning in terms of competencies, but also in terms of credit recommendations that then could be mapped to degrees, licenses, certificates as part of a learner's academic portfolio, and then connected to employers, right, to create consistency on those skills. So through the American Council on Education, with some support from the Koch Foundation, we just did this work with 10 pilot apprenticeship programs, validated the learning, had industry experts to help us build the taxonomy and frameworks. Mark can talk about that. Program validation, validity and reliability being a key piece. And so now what we're doing is connecting those apprentices. We did 10 pilot programs. There are 42,000 apprentices impacted. 35% represent underserved populations. And now we're starting to connect with employers like Robert Half, John Deere, you've probably heard of them, North America's Building Trades Union, and Volley and Home Captain, which is, IT. So demystifying the stereotypes of what apprentices are and how they work and connecting them to both employers and higher ed, what's an opportunity for Future Ready Oregon right there?
It sounds like it's an opportunity to hire you to help us.
I'm ready to serve and support. I mean, that's the great thing about ACE is that we have this national lens. I just talked to Indiana and Arkansas, but they don't have the resources that you have. This is like a real gift.
So I want to actually have some others respond to that, but probably both the Marks, first of all, and then Kate, I want to go to you too, because I think you bring a national perspective on a lot of best practices related to apprenticeship, related to sector work and sector partnerships related to skilling up. But I would love to have either Mark here respond to that question of how do we deliberately connect apprenticeship work into career pathway system building? That's what we're talking about here. And how do we make sure that we're monitoring and evaluating for the right success factors?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I don't think when we take a look at the integration, there's a silver bullet, but there may be silver buckshot. If we take a look at how, for example, the related instruction is credentialed on a transcript at a community college, and how that could actually be Pell eligible, Title IV eligible, right? So that reduces the cost to the student for the related instruction that's part of an apprenticeship. In addition to that, there are ways of looking at federal work study, for example, as a way to leverage a partnership with employers that could help offset a portion of the cost of that on-the-job training. And that's an area that we need to explore further. I think that taking a look at the way that the applied baccalaureates could work in this state. So Oregon has the authority now for community colleges to offer applied baccalaureate degrees. Wouldn't it be interesting to look at an apprenticeship-based degree pathway that culminated in applied baccalaureate degree that's there when you journey out? You could get an undergrad, you could get an applied associate's degree, let's say in sustainable building practices, and then you get a applied baccalaureate, let's say in project management for construction. Specialize in sustainable building practices. I mean, there are a lot of different ways, I think, that we may be able to look at this. During the Obama administration, there was something called the Registered Apprenticeship Community College Consortium Project. So this was a nationwide effort led by DOL in partnership with the Department of Education to create a framework for different states and community college apprenticeship programs within those states to create credit equivalencies so that when apprentices move from state to state, not only is their Journey Cert portable, but some of their credit work would be portable as well. And there were several hundred community colleges that signed on. It kind of was put on the back burner during the previous administration. So I think it'll be interesting under the current administration to think about how this kind of a framework could be amped up, ramped up, and with the credit equivalencies that ACE can develop for apprenticeship type experience, see how Future Ready Oregon might be able to sort of put it on steroids.
Why reinvent the wheel?
Yeah.
Thank you. I love this. I love that this really is getting to how do we package all of the really good work that has been out there, is still out there, but needs to be put together in a way that is going to be, again, a true career pathway system that individuals can access at multiple points. Mark, I'm going to turn to you for some comments and thoughts on this, and then I'm going to ask Kate to weigh in on what you see nationally around some of this work, and then I want to hear again from the audience, so be ready. Mark?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, not one I'm an expert on. We are working with Apprenti on launching a rigorous evaluation of their program. They're a national apprenticeship organization, as you all probably know. And in my understanding, the organizations that do the training are not typically in the community college system. They're nonprofits, including Per Scholas at times, or for-profits. And I don't know that the interesting question for me is, are the employers eager for this kind of partnership or not? And are the people who are enrolling eager for it or not? I just don't know, but that's how I would, it hasn't come up in our conversations with Apprenti as a part of what they're doing so far.
Great, thanks, Mark. So Kate, we've heard a lot already, right? But because I think the National Skills Coalition really does have such an incredible bird's eye view on what's happening in states around the country related to all of this work, related to apprenticeships, related to upskilling and what needs to happen on the ground, what are some of your thoughts and comments hearing all of this?
So I guess to start, before I turn over to the other national examples, I do really want to elevate how Oregon really is leading the way in a number of areas. So we're currently working with about 30 states, either providing direct technical assistance, research, or supporting different initiatives. And so Oregon's career pathways approach is really groundbreaking, and Oregon was one of the first states out of the gate with a career pathways model that influenced DOL definition. And I think in addition to the stackable credentials, to that progression to integrated education and training, as President Mitsui mentioned, that support services and holistic coaching have always been central in that. So I think that's a key component. Partnerships have always been in the ethos of what Oregon is doing. So you look at how you have this career pathways model, and then it's been scaled through the SNAP employment and training. So Oregon Department of Human Services has done really innovative work in moving radically away from the work first model and really focusing on moving people into career pathways and out of poverty through access to education and high quality skills training, coupled with the support services that address the basic needs and security or costs that face so many students and learners. And then within that ecosystem, there's community-based organizations, there's nonprofits, there's employment departments. So I think that's an element of in Oregon of what needs to be replicated. We're currently doing a technical assistance project with 5 states to help them replicate Oregon's model, to build career pathways systems through these partnerships, through the SNAP employment training, through leveraging federal funds. And so I think in looking at what states are doing, it's we have historic investments right now coming at the federal level. And Future Ready Oregon is one of the most innovative in just the way racial equity has been centered in it. But there's an opportunity right now that these investments can really dismantle the systemic inequities or deepen them. And so how do you really look at, how do you evaluate, how do you center the voices of workers and learners? Some states that are doing some really innovative work right now, or you look at Louisiana and Virginia and Nevada have all looked at career pathways and really focused on creating a quality credential framework that goes from non-credit all the way up. And then they've coupled that with supports and tuition assistance. That's whether you're non-credit or credit. That's a really great model. California is doing some really great work with their high road training partnerships. And so that's a sector strategies approach that brings together those partners, support services, and focused on not only increasing access to skills training, especially for BIPOC workers, but thinking about as you move to a clean economy, how do you ensure that folks aren't left behind and that they're part of it? And then how do you influence job quality in that? So it's one thing to create access to education, to do the support services, to get people into credentials, but then if they're not moving into a quality job that provides progression, it's not realizing the potential. And then I think Minnesota's done some really great work around data in terms of looking at what are the outcomes from these training programs and disaggregating them. So looking at all these different training programs that are funded through public funding streams and those braided approach, how do you ensure that they are actually leading to, that they're being completed, that they're supports, and they're actually leading to good jobs equitably. So it's not just that, so that the learners of color, so the parents, so the immigrants have equitable access to good jobs. So those I would think are some highlights that really build on what Oregon's doing here, and those partnerships focus on pathways, focus on equity.
Great, thank you. So I'd love to turn it to the audience now. I want to hear what you're hearing in this. I feel like there is a true opportunity, again, not just to package this up, but really, as you have pointed out, I mean, I think, Kate, that was a somewhat beautiful summary in that there is such an opportunity to blend and braid and just make sure that individual programs are not just operating as individual programs, right? But they actually do have deliberate linkages together. So I'd love to hear from all of you. What are you hearing? What are the big opportunities that you see in front of us right now, or what are some of your experiences based on making sure that isolated training doesn't happen, right? But they are integrated and connected together in a systems way. And I will call on some folks if I don't see any. Yes?
I would say allowing students to create horizontal pathways that integrate all the different trainings toward their ideal careers.
Great.
And allow also fast tracking it as
Great.
a component.
Great. So the student-centered, right? The horizontal pathways, the fast track, excellent. What else are you all hearing? What opportunities do you see in some of this? Yes, please.
Hi there, Alejandro Segura, he, el pronouns. I've heard a lot of conversation today about what is being done to help these people of different demographics and the tracks that are trying to be created, but not a lot of conversation around how to empower them. A little bit, you touched on that briefly. And I'm just interested in, an easy one would be like unions, involve them in the process and do a revolutionary thing of encouraging unions for the first time in business. But what's being done to empower the people that you're trying to place in these careers?
Anybody want to take that?
I can start and then I'll turn it to Kate. So I love that question because, first of all, employers need to be the partner in this space, right, as they're having their learning validated, saving TA. But some work with Digital Promise, they're also a nonprofit. One thing we haven't talked about today are digital credentials, right? And how we're connecting from K-12 to the employer, to the college, back to the employer, back to the college, like it's an ebb and flow. Digital Promise is leaning in on a learner voice for learning and employment records for equity. And hopefully next month, I'm on their steering committee, next month they should be releasing that report and those frameworks from which maybe Future Ready Oregon could benchmark some conversations in creating those synergies across those stakeholder groups. So insider intel, shh, don't tell anybody. Kate?
I guess I'm going to use two examples. One in Oregon, so the Benefit Navigator Bill, House Bill 2835, was really innovative in that that was really driven by students. That was really passed because of student voice and student advocacy, and students are a required partner in the implementation, which is highly unusual, that students are, that's codified in legislation, that they have an influence in a voice in how this will play out. So that's an example of empowering students. In California, we're part of an initiative called the Worker Equity Initiative, and it's a partnership with UCLA Labor Center, and then a number of nonprofits, worker rights centers, San Diego Workforce Partnership, and so that initiative is partnering with the labor agency to look at how the public workforce development system can advance racial, gender, and worker equity. And there has been a series of worker interviews, worker voice, and so a series of recommendations came out that was based on what the workers said, and then we're partnering with the labor agency to begin implementing. So it's kind of inside-outside change, but really driven by and centered by the workers. Labor's involved in that, and so they've been at the table the whole time. So it's kind of creating a coalition and a table for that elevates the voice instead of, I think sometimes we seek feedback, but there's no input to actually actualize and act on the feedback. So that's a model that we're exploring how that can look at a very large state with significant investments.
Great, thanks, Kate. Larry?
One thing that I should point out, since I'm with the Bureau of Labor and Industries, is that we also need to protect the workers' rights as we're training people to get into the workforce and once they're already in the workforce, right? So the Civil Rights Office obviously has a role in that, but in our program, we've also funded respectful workplace training for construction work, so bystander intervention, such as the Green Dot training, and there's a training called Rise Up that started in the Seattle area that we've are emulating here. And we have a partnership with the Safety Climate Lab over at Oregon Health and Science University to develop a respectful workplace climate scale that we hope is going to help us to benchmark and evaluate trainings and to show improvement in the respectful workplace climate.
You know, one thing we haven't discussed is how we create space for learning. How do we educate and inform each other as we're creating these partnerships, as learners are thinking about what does this mean? How do I use a credential? How do I go to school? In May of 2021, we did a quick survey of ACE transcript holders, and our partner is Credly. About 1,200 responded to that survey. 61%, 25 or older, 93% working, right? 50% women. And the top 4 things was not just about how do I save money, how do I go back to school, but I don't understand the system and I need more access to advising. So it's great to have a website, but I don't know what to do with it. I don't understand the language, right? So how do we, Future Ready Oregon, create opportunities to educate and inform and build knowledge transfer, both internally, but also externally with the entire community?
That's a great question, Michele, and we haven't spent a lot of time really delineating what role the state needs to play in all of this work compared to the regional role, compared to the institutional roles. And so I think this is something we really need to begin to think about, and perhaps we touch on that in the very last session of implications really going forward on what I call swim lanes, right? And making sure that roles and responsibilities are clear. That's actually a pretty, I'm going to say, light lift, right, that a state can play, is how do we actually facilitate the knowledge sharing so people and institutions and regions do not keep operating in silos, not knowing how to partner effectively. So benchmarking has come up a couple times, and so I want to turn one last question to you, Mark Elliott, because I think this is something you have quite a lot of experience with, just the evaluation, the data. How do we know we're going to be successful? What is it going to take to make sure that we are putting the right goals in front of us? It's a big question, of course, but here's the underlying issue, right, which came up earlier, I believe, in a morning panel, is there's risks here, too. This is a lot of money. Does it make anybody nervous? Right? It should a little bit. So talk to us a little bit, Mark, about the risks and opportunities, but how do we make sure we're using data and evaluation appropriately?
Well, I think it is, we had a discussion to prepare for this panel, and I raised this very point that it made me nervous that so much money was going in. And I asked, Is it 1 year money or is it continuing money? And my understanding is that it's mostly 1 year money. So I think it's important for everyone who's involved in this to be figuring out, how do we make sure this is not a, complete snafu, and the workforce development field isn't criticized for not spending the money very well. I understand there will be some kind of evaluation of it going forward, but I think it's worth the organizations receiving the money to really think about what kind of data does it make sense to collect, and are we going to have any kind of collective effort about what the outcomes are and what the performance is, or are we going to hold ourselves and each other accountable to guard against, what might be the outcome we don't want, which is that the money wasn't used very well. So I do believe that, it's incredible the kind of investment Oregon's making. I think it's extraordinary. I wish it was ramping up from a little lower level to a larger level, and using evidence to decide where to put the increased investment. But I do think it's worth really paying attention to the analytics and figuring out what kind of transparency needs to be put in place to hold everybody accountable.
Great, thanks, Mark. I'm going to ask for just final quick comments from the panel, and then we will move on to our last session.
I guess I think this is a really historic opportunity for Oregon, and I think it's a lot of years of advocacy in the making. I mean, I worked at Portland Community College, was involved in career pathways for a lot of years, and so to see that there's actually ongoing investments is really exciting. And I think just continuing that community of practice element and scaling across the state and sharing what works, that's something states are asking us, how do you build that? How do you do that? And that's just what Oregon does. So I think really using that to look at what's working and what's not.
Great.
Yeah, I think this is a really historic investment in new connective tissue between different actors within the workforce space that we didn't see before, in particular investments in culturally specific CBOs. And I do think it's intentional that equitable prosperity was a cornerstone of the new strategic plan of the Governor's Workforce Board, and the governor put that work under the Racial Justice Council. And so keeping that in mind and centered as we move forward, I do think that this has an opportunity to be more inclusive and to create communication, planning, assessment elements that we've not had before. I have a friend, former president of Miami-Dade Community College, who likes to say, Eduardo Padron is his name, that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And I think of Future Ready Oregon as our way of making opportunity as universal as the talent around us.
As our tagline is, put your learning to work, activate on that. Joe mentioned it in the last panel, you're building relationships. For me, that is all centered on trust. You are building trust with one another. You have to learn to lean into measuring that trust, not just with quality, but the data to support that. And give yourself the space and time to learn from one another.
I guess I would just like to say on behalf of the Bureau of Labor and Industries and the Oregon State Apprenticeship and Training Council that I appreciate the confidence that the legislature has expressed in us in putting us in charge of the apprenticeship investments for the state, and we look forward to doing you proud.
Thanks, Larry. Mark, any final words from you?
No, I wouldn't presume to really say. I am not in Oregon, obviously don't know it as well as everybody who's there, but look, this is a high profile initiative, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. Okay, well, please join me in thanking our final panel for the day. Thank you so much, everyone.